Hi, my name is Ed Flack and I'm a drummer, and I'm also interested in history, and thank you for visiting my channel. Today I'd like to talk with you about the history of the American snare drum style from its ancient origins in the late 18th century to how it became known as modern drumming in the early 20th century. To assist with my explanations, I've created a series of short video animations from scanning images out of books by Gus Moeller, J. Burns Moore, and Earl Sturtz. There's also a bonus video of the Basel drummer Dr. Fritz Berger. When I was a beginning drummer, it seemed like all the books that I was assigned to study included the word modern drumming in their title or somewhere in the text. It made me wonder, what is not modern drumming? How can you have one without the other? It's like the word hot without the word cold. So what is modern drumming? One way to define it is to say that which is currently and popularly accepted to be the most advanced form of drumming is in effect modern. But to define modern drumming as whatever it is today is not specific enough to be useful for comparison over time or across styles. There is no specific date we can point to on a calendar and say, this is the day modern drumming was born. That said, a convenient starting point is the year 1875. That's the year the U.S. Army discontinued the fife and drum as their primary signal instrument and replaced it with the bugle. The way that the ancient snare drumming style had evolved was due in no small measure to fife music and the way that the drums complemented the rhythms and melodies of the fife. The rhythmic 16th note melodies that were so natural on the fife were difficult to play on the bugle. Since the marches could not be slowed down to accommodate the sustained linear sound of the bugle, the solution was speed up the march tempos. The quicker tempos significantly influenced the American snare drum style, and the roots of modern drumming began to take hold. In the beginning, the modern drumming techniques of grip, playing position, and stroke all remained exactly the same as the ancient style. The difference was they just had to be played faster. Many drum rudiments, which were so elegantly crafted within the fife and drum genre, were simply too difficult to play at the faster bugle tempos. The solution was to simplify. The first thing that went was the 7-stroke roll, got replaced by the 5-stroke roll. A lot of flams and drag grace notes had to go by the wayside as well. After World War I, civic and patriotic organizations sprang up all across the United States. The most popular and successful was the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Many of these posts sponsored their own fife and drum corps or drum and bugle corps or bands, and they started having competitions. Competition was not new. They'd been doing it in Connecticut pretty heavily since the 1870s, but this is now nationwide. It soon became evident in competition that the playing styles practiced by fife and drum corps versus that of the drum and bugle corps were different. Categorical definitions were needed to establish a more equitable system of judging by separating these two classes of style. There are many variables that could be used to distinguish between the styles, but the main ingredient was tempo. So units that marched at tempos below 110 beats per minute were classified as ancient, and units that marched at tempos of 120 beats per minute and higher were modern. Moeller's book is innovative for the time because he was the first to use film strips to show stroke motions. He is attentive to details in his narrative directions and passionate about his art. However, the Moeller book is not about modern drumming as it quickly evolved during his time. Moeller's book is a love letter to the past, a tribute to ancient style drumming played in the U.S. military during the Civil War. Moore represented the objectives of the National Association of Rudimental Drummers to preserve the heritage and traditions of American rudimental drumming while standardizing it for competition and making it relevant and accessible for modern drummers. Sturtz wrote of a scientific approach to drumming. He looked for ways to increase speed and power by studying the anatomy and physics of drum stroke motions. The style he taught was powerful and open, using high drum strokes. Dr. Fritz Berger was from Basel, a city in northwestern Switzerland where the Swiss, German, and French borders meet. It should be no surprise that the French drumming style heavily influences the Basel drum style. During the 1950s, there was a fife and drum corps from Brooklyn, New York called the Sons of Liberty. They were led by a Juilliard graduate, Les Parks. Other drummers in that line included Bobby Thompson and Nick Atanasio. The Sons employed a low stick height, much closer to the drumhead than Earl Sturtz taught. The low stick height offered an advantage that allowed complex rudiments to be controlled at faster tempos. Parks, Thompson, and other Sons drummers began teaching their style, which some call the regimental style, to drum and bugle corps. The influence was profound and lasting. The 1920s and 30s opened the floodgates to a wealth of knowledge and opinions about the new modern drumming. Significant changes were happening. The modern drum style developed pragmatically from a mix of influences. Modern stylists felt free to adopt non-military musical ideas, including circus music, jazz, and foreign drum styles. Meanwhile, drum corps rudimenters did not live in a vacuum. It is impossible to imagine that rudimenters were unfamiliar with concert and theater drummers' contributions during their time, like Billy Gladstone and George L. Stone. They would have listened to countless jazz luminaries like Max Roach, Art Blakey, Joe Morello, Evan Jones, Gene Krupa, and Buddy Rich. The modern American rudimental style has benefited from a melting pot of ideas stirred by competition.